Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Well, we are back. Hopefully, we've been able to solve this technical issue, and we're back with my guest. I will reintroduce her, professor in the Department of Political Studies and director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group at the University of Manitoba, the convener of the International Manifesto Group and author of several books, Dr. Radhika Desai. As always, welcome back, and let's try this again.
Let's do it again, Wilma.
Okay, so still sticking with Syria for a couple more questions. Who do you think now, if we look at the status of Syria, we now apparently have refugees are coming back into the country. Who do you see investing to help stabilize and rebuild the country?
Well, okay, this is a very complex question. So first of all, let me say that it was reported in the Financial Times that many European governments are now saying they're going to stop processing the applications for a for refugee status by Syrians because Assad is gone and therefore everything is fine. But I don't think everything is going to be fine for Syria for a very long time, particularly given that with Israel already, as we've discussed, making military incursions into Syrian territory, talking about taking a large chunk of Syria, making it part of Greater Israel. Therefore, Syria faces a war. There is also the issue of what kind of government these people will create. Clearly, the Turks, the Americans, the Israelis, all the forces that have Europeans of various colors, these people will all want a piece of the action with any new government. So in that sense, the new government will not necessarily be an independent government. But that is indeed what Syria needs. And any self-respecting government should protect the territorial integrity of Syria. So exactly what the government will do, this the new leader of Syria is being touted as, of course, he was once a terrorist. Now he's being desperately and hurriedly whitewashed in the Western media. So all of these things tell us that the government and the way in which the government will be run, who will run it, all of these are open questions. Remember one other important thing. There are many, many signs that this was a negotiated transition. That is to say that the rebels essentially were given Syria by a departing Assad administration, which then is, Assad is now in Moscow. He has political asylum there. As various people have pointed out, there was hardly any fighting. It's not
Correct.
like great fighters have taken Syria. No, Assad has simply left Syria. And I heard a very good interview with Gilbert Doctorow just this morning, actually, and he said something very interesting. People are talking about sanctions working, and that's why Assad had to leave and so on. But really, it wasn't the sanctions. And we'll come back to that. But it wasn't the sanctions. There's a whole issue of the effect and the effectiveness of sanctions. But what did work was the fact that the oil-producing parts of Syria remained in the hands of Kurdish forces and other forces, and therefore the United States had a finger in that pie. And the ability of other forces to deny the Assad government access to these resources and the revenues from these resources was really what seemed to have ensured this outcome. So this is the situation we're in. It's anybody's guess what line this government will take. We'll just have to see, because many members of the Assad government, the government presided over by Assad, are now going to be part of this new government. So we'll just have to see what its actual orientation will be.
Zhu Yun writes, Bashar al-Assad was a jerk. That's not his word, but I'll just use that. I'm glad that he was deposed. See, I believe in sovereignty, and the discussions that we're having aren't pro-Assad or anti-Assad. They're anti-process in terms of U.S.-backed regime change. If the Syrian people wanted Assad out, then throw him out, however they want to throw him out. But as soon as we see the United States hand behind this move, again, history is replete with these types of examples. It doesn't bode well for the country. It doesn't bode well for the region. It doesn't bode well for the world. So Zhu Yun, al-Assad can be the greatest jerk. He can be a bigger jerk than Donald Trump. But the United States doesn't respect sovereignty. And that's really my big issue here, Dr. Desai.
Well, I completely agree with you, and I would add to that that the important thing from the point of view of the vast majority of the people of the region of West Asia, the Middle East, whatever we want to call it, was that the Assad government was part of the so-called axis of resistance, the key force that was the most determined opponent of the Israeli oppression of the Palestinians, the most determined supporter of the Palestinian cause, and all of that. And it's also very interesting. I don't know if many people have noticed this, but I was very surprised to see that Hamas has sent a congratulatory message to the rebels, the people who have taken power now in Syria. And I thought, what's going on here? But when you read the message carefully, what they are asking for is they're asking the new government to continue Syria's historic support for Palestine. And from that point of view, I think that this kind of message makes a lot of sense.
And so now, and following along the same line, when you look at al-Jilani and where he's from, there's the CIA in the United States considered him to be a terrorist, considered him to be the leader of a terrorist organization, to the point of a $10 million bounty for information leading to his arrest. So now, you know, he spends a couple of years in a prison camp in the region. He arrives back on the scene with, as the Wall Street Journal said, bags full of money. It's these types of machinations that cause me so much heartburn, because if the United States can put him on the terrorist list, then and now all of a sudden all's good in the neighborhood, why can't we deal with Cuba as an example?
Well, I mean, this is of course, Cuba is, the United States is already tightening and has been tightening the screws on Cuba. Cuba is facing an enormous crisis of electricity, of supplies of all sorts, and so on. So that is, in a certain sense, already going on. But I think that if the United States, I mean, you know, in the earlier part of the discussion, one of the things I was emphasizing is that the situation is as complex as it is. The situation can be compared to Libya and Afghanistan and Iraq and so on, precisely because the United States no longer has the ability to determine outcomes. And in that sense, you know, I think that, and that's why, instead of putting in place in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and now in Syria, a government that will do the United States bidding, the United States instead has to contend with the fact that there are many other actors, all of whom we have goals that are not exactly aligned with that of the United States. Even Israel's goals are not exactly aligned with the United States. So in that situation, the United States is no longer able to determine outcomes. And this also, I mean, Cuba is small. Cuba is very close to the United States. I hope that the possibility to which you are mentioning is not realized. But even in the case of Cuba, I would say that the United States' room for maneuver is relatively limited.
And 4 Images More asks you, is the axis of resistance finished? Is the Palestinian cause lost? Zhu Yun says it is not lost. And because Syria fell, that doesn't mean the resistance is over. Your thoughts?
I would agree with the second, with Zhu Yun. I would say that my own view is that, yes, of course, the fall of Syria creates a problem for the axis of resistance. It was a central part of the axis of resistance. But the Iran, which is the core of this. Iran's abilities to fight against Israel, to fend off any kind of military action from the United States remains undiminished. And as you know, recently there has also been there was been this talk of, and in fact the agreement with Russia and Iran, between Russia and Iran, which will be a military as well as other forms of agreement. So I think that Iran at the moment is not in danger. And I would say that it is quite possible that if necessary, Iran will rebuild its arms supply mechanisms for Hezbollah through some other means. I mean, the region is a big place. If one route is cut off, there will be another route. So I'm not certain that the axis of resistance is over, because you see, the raison d'etre of the axis of resistance has not disappeared.
Correct.
The raison d'etre is the operations of American imperialism in the region, in particular via Israel, and those reasons have not gone away. They are in many ways in trouble, but they are not gone away. And I think that the axis of resistance is needed. And I would say that I would be very surprised if Iran and its other parts of the axis of resistance are not able to recreate the supply routes and other bonds between them in some new fashion.
And you have fit us into a very tight timeline or schedule. So let's move on to the discussion to what I see as the larger issue. In a speech entitled "How Trade Wars and Sanctions Are Backfiring on the U.S., you state what today is called the crisis of multilateralism is in reality a crisis of U.S. supranationalist cosmopolitanism or U.S. imperialism." And I believe what we're seeing manifest and play itself out in Syria is an example of what you're referencing in that piece.
Absolutely. So it definitely cries out for analysis within that larger framework. So the cosmopolitan supranationalist approach that I was referring to, you can also call it the globalist, etc. As you know, the Biden administration, and before that, going back to the Obama and Clinton administrations and so on, they have always represent, and by the way, the Bush administration is also part of it. The establishment of both political parties are part of this globalist agenda. And the globalist agenda is simply a way of saying that the whole world should be unified under the domination of the United States. The whole world economy should be open to supply the needs of, and to be and to accept the capital and the commodities of big American corporations. That is the agenda. However, and of course, that has always been the agenda of imperialism, going back to the bad old days of colonialism. I put bad old days in heavy quotation marks. So from that point onwards, the thrust of imperialism has been to open and subordinate the rest of the world to the domination of the Western countries, today led by the United States. However, of course, in the long run, the ability of these countries to impose their will on the world has shrunk, because enough parts of the rest of the world have been inclined to and capable of resisting this domination by protecting themselves from it militarily, but also economically, and developing their own productive capacities, and something that is very intimately connected to that, their military capacity. So today, in the United States, we are told it is a great military power and so on. But as I've emphasized many times, the US has not really won a single war. I mean, okay, maybe it can overrun Panama or Grenada, but against any sizable power, the United States cannot win. The United States and its strategists have fantasized about invading Iran for a long time, but so far, at least, they have not dared to do so. The United States' ability to supply Ukraine has been very problematic. It has not worked. It has certainly not enabled the Ukrainians to fight the Russians. And this is also connected with the fact that what the US is experiencing today, the West is experiencing today, are levels of deindustrialization which make them incapable of producing the arms at the rate that would be necessary to militarily enforce their domination on the world.
In fact, when you look at these sanctions regimes, what really appears to me is the sanctions now only work against American allies. Look at the United States blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline. As you just mentioned, deindustrialization, the deindustrialization of Germany. The United States, through its sanctions regime, only seems to impact the coalition of the willing, because now with the rise of BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other entities, countries have found other mechanisms, not only for trade, but um, but along with those trade agreements, to say, if attacked, we will defend each other.
Well, exactly. I mean, let me just say that, it's important to understand, in order to understand how imperialism is operating, it's important to understand important to understand the difference between Germany and China. Germany, operating under the delusion that the United States is an ally and a friend, with the Scholz government in particular, we're willing to go along with the Americans completely, including hiding the fact that they know that the Americans were involved in blowing up the lifeline of Germany, of industrial Germany, namely the Nord Stream pipelines. So what happens to you if you accept American power, American domination? What happens to you is you are deindustrialized, because if the United States is deindustrializing, as it is not going to allow other industrial powers to thrive. So Germany is being destroyed. Meanwhile, China, which is wary of the United States, which is taking the measures to ensure that it is protected both economically and militarily from the United States, which is open to dealing with the United States, but only on terms of equality and equal respect and mutuality and so on. China, by contrast, has managed not only to preserve its vast industrial base, it is the biggest industrial country in the world by far, but it is also working, and successfully working, to advance its technological capabilities, so much so that it is today in the vanguard of a number of leading technologies. So the contrast between the fate of Germany today, over the last couple of years in particular, and China, on the other hand, should be very instructive for anybody who thinks that American power is benign.
And I think people make a big mistake in looking at the support for this U.S. dynamic by the European elite and ignoring what's happening on the ground with the European body politic, looking at the protests in Germany, looking at the protests in France, looking at the protests in London. Europeans are not happy, are not pleased with their leadership. That's why Macron is on his way out. That's why Scholz is on his way out. Keir Starmer came in as a result of displeasure with the government. And of course, we could talk about Greece, we could talk about Italy from a number of years ago, because they were really at the tip of the spear in terms of neoliberalism and this shift. Are those correct dots to connect?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was such an interesting and instructive thing that the German government of Olaf Scholz and his Green partners collapsed within hours of the declaration of the US election results. I mean, talk about joined dots. I mean, these dots were definitely very joined. And the reason is very simple, because what collapsed with the what appeared to collapse with the election of Donald Trump is this globalist agenda. Now, exactly how Donald Trump will relate to the globalist agenda remains an open question. And this is for several reasons. On the one hand, Donald Trump knows that, as with the French, as with the Germans, as with the British, the globalist agenda is abhorrent to the ordinary population. So in order to win elections, you have to spout rhetoric that is opposed to that agenda, that imperial agenda. So, Trump said things like, I will stop the war in Ukraine the first day I'm in office. Or indeed, I think he even said the first day he's elected. Now that date has come and gone. So on the one hand, Trump had to say these things in order to get elected, and elected he did get. Now what happens? What happens is that, of course, some of the people who, big corporate CEOs who supported him right the way through, they already are beginning to blunt some of Trump's own distinctive messages. So, for example, on tariffs with China, of course, Elon Musk does not like tariffs against Chinese goods because he's producing his cars in China. And there are other such instances. At the same time, with Trump having won, all the other capitalists, big corporate CEOs who had not supported Trump in the expectation that Harris would get elected, are now circling their wagons around Trump. They are basically trying to do deals with Trump and saying, okay, we must, they are accepting Trump essentially. And you are even reading in outlets such as The Guardian and the Financial Times stories about how some of the policies he's recommending will not be half bad, sort of thing. And then finally, there is the whole issue of whether these policies are practicable. So, for example, on Ukraine, I mean, how is Trump going to stop the war? The only people who can really stop the war are the Russians, because they are on the winning side, and the war will stop when they are good and ready. On tariffs, the moment he imposes tariffs, not only, the 20 and 30 and 40% on sundry countries, but 100% tariffs on the BRICS countries if they continue to their efforts to de-dollarize, etc. These sorts of tariffs will only massively increase inflation within the United States, which is already a big problem. It was a problem that got Trump elected, but if Trump himself sponsors inflation in the United States through his policies, he's basically not, or his successor is not going to get elected, and he will leave no legacy to speak of. And finally, on the deportation of these 11 million allegedly illegal immigrants, of course, deporting 11 million people is going to collapse the US economy, because these are the people who are here, not because they are, living off the welfare state or anything. America hasn't got much of a welfare state to speak of, but because they are working, they are providing the labor that American capital needs, the American economy needs. Deporting them is not going to be a very good idea. Many CEOs are already telling Trump that, and we are already seeing that now the talk has shifted to, instead of deporting 11 million people, maybe just 1 million of the really hardened criminals. And I'm sure that figure will come down. I'm not saying that this is going to end well. Of course, there will be a reign of terror created amongst anybody who is not white, for the fear of being deported if you happen not to have your papers, etc. It's not going to be pretty at all, but it's not going to be what Trump said.
And 2 minutes, and then I know you got to go, but I think this is a very good question, which is what is going to happen to Erdogan? Oh, here we go. Can you talk about the future of Turkey in BRICS or any other project for multipolarity, especially for the time being? Because I'm wondering, with Erdogan turning his back on Vladimir Putin, Russia isn't going to look too favorably upon that. Has Erdogan, over the long term, overplayed his hand?
That's a very interesting question, and it's possible that basically, what is Erdogan's what's his stake in this game? Erdogan's stake is that he will try to essentially, or he wants an outcome in which he can say that he has resolved the Kurdish problem for Turkey. I'm not sure he's going to get it, but that is his main outcome. Now, as far as Turkey is concerned and Erdogan is concerned, Turkey is very centrally located. And this is partly why Turkey is allowed to essentially, play on all different sides, So I don't think that the BRICS or Russia or Iran, for that matter, will ever stop talking with Turkey, no matter how it betrays them. And I think the same goes for the West, unfortunately. So in a certain sense, Turkey has mastered the art of sort of balancing different sides against one another. And so in itself, I would say that the possibility of Turkey being part of the BRICS, etc., has not been annulled by these actions. And as I remember, the other thing that it's not just me, everybody's saying the situation is very fluid.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of conflicting interests being played out, and I think we need to wait and see. I would say that it is very unlikely that Turkey will get what it wants in its entirety, but it is also extremely unlikely that even Israel and the United States will get what they want. I mean, and it's important to emphasize this because a lot of people, both those who are welcoming this and those who are dismayed by this, are convinced that this is like the United States has won, Israel has won, Russia has lost, Iran has lost. These kinds of judgments are too quick for now.
Yes.
And I would say that we will see in the coming weeks and months how the situation evolves, but I don't think it's going to be one-sidedly in favor of Iran or, for that matter, the United States.
Dr. Radhika Desai, thank you so much for your time, getting you out on time. Folks, we apologize for that technical issue. We did the best we could, and here we are. Thank you. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you so much. Bye.
All right. Thank you. So, folks, let me try to answer a couple of questions here. And I think Dr. Desai's closing point is something that we all really need to keep in mind. And that is, this is what's happening in Syria is an incredibly, incredibly fluid situation, and that things could change at the drop of a hat. So right now, what we're engaged in is more speculation than anything, well-informed speculation, as well as one can be informed in these circumstances. But again, I think to try to draw conclusions or to try to make predictions about the future of all of this, I think we're way too early in the game. We haven't even gotten to the bottom of the first inning, and folks are trying to figure out what the final score is going to be. Charles asks, well, good morning, Charles. Iran will now nuke up. I don't know. See, because, and this is, I'll try to be as succinct with this point, Charles, as I can be. Different countries have different strategies relating to their military and how they work to protect themselves. So, for example, looking at Russia, Russia has designed a system, a defense system that is defensive, not offensive. And, you know, when was the last time Russia invaded anybody? It's not what they do. They have designed a system, a defensive system, that to a great degree is based upon a war of attrition that is primarily artillery based. So when Ukraine provoked this fight at the behest of the United States, Russia had developed an incredible artillery base. They've just been raining artillery shells on various elements in Ukraine for months and months and months and months and months. Just ungodly, unbelievable amounts of artillery. A war of attrition. I'm going to rain artillery down on you until you cry uncle. Now, as part of that also, they've developed hypersonic technology. And they demonstrated that about a week or 10 days ago, and hoping that their demonstration of that one artillery, that one hypersonic missile would demonstrate to the world, you don't want none of this smoke. Unfortunately, the U.S. is too stupid to get the message. So I use that as an example to say it appears as though Iran has developed a similar approach to defending themselves. They have an incredible amount of missiles. And when you start talking about Iran going nuclear, now you're talking about a theocracy, Iran is a theocracy, going against one of the fundamental tenets of Islam. And I don't know, and I say this because I don't know, that Iran is willing to go against one of the fundamental elements of Islam. Because remember, the killing of innocent, the Quran has rules of war. We know we know about international law. We know about the Geneva Conventions. We know about all of those international aspects of conflict. But the Quran has within its own text rules of conflict that Muslims are to follow. And nuclear war is one of the elements that is against the tenets of the Quran because it involves the killing of innocent individuals. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to this question. All I can tell you is the couple of times I've been to Iran and my conversations with Iranians at various levels, they all tell me the same thing. No, they're not going nuclear. It's not what they do. Now, times can change, circumstances can change, but that's been my experience. And let me say, Charles, I'd bet your house on that one. How about that? Zhu Yun, the U.S. won the 1991 Gulf War. Well, some of that might come down to how you define win. But Zhu Yun, I don't know that I would agree with the fact that the United States won the 1991 Gulf War. Again, it would kind of depend on how you define win. Because I remember Minister Farrakhan saying in 91, before the war, he said in a speech that he gave at the National Press Club, and then from the National Press Club, he went over to what was then the Howard Inn at Howard University and spoke to the Black press. And I remember him saying very clearly, he said, you can't win this, talking about the Gulf War. He said, you can't win this with your technology. He said, within the first couple of weeks, maybe a month, you got this. He said, but eventually you're going to have to bring your soldiers in here. And when you bring your soldiers into Iraq, they got something for you. And he said, you might be able to declare a short-term victory, but the conflict in Iraq will only become the precipitant to other conflict. The precipitant to other conflict. And I believe that Minister Farrakhan was more prophetic in that one speech than I think I have ever heard him be. So that's why I say, Zhu Hyun, this depends on how you define win. And this also takes me to, I think it was Mao. I mentioned this yesterday on the show. In the 60s, Mao was asked, what did he think of the French Revolution? And he said, it's still too early to tell. See, because Zhu Yun, you also have to remember, different cultures have different understandings of the concept of time based upon how long the cultures have been in existence. So when you're dealing with cultures that have been in existence for 5,000 years, 6,000 years, 7,000 years versus the United States, which is going to celebrate 250 years of existence, they have different perspectives on time. And Dr. King told us the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. So when you look at China, when you look at Iran, when you look at Iraq, entities that were involved in the creation of civilization as we now come to understand it, they have different aspects, different perspectives of time. So when you say in 1991, the United States won the Gulf War, maybe they did in 91 and lost it in 93. Maybe, we could debate that. Charles, Iran's arsenal. Getting back to my point, someone also asks, is this the end of Israel? I don't want to say that this is the end of anything or anybody, as Dr. Desai said. It's too early to tell. But I know this. Iran has a missile arsenal. They have already proven that they have a very deep arsenal of missiles, not necessarily nuclear, but ballistic missiles, as well as many believe that they also now have hypersonic technology. And look at the damage that they've been able to create with their drones, just with their drones. And understand that they've only hit military targets. And they're very clear about, up to this point of the process, only hitting military targets. Why? Because as Muslims, they, by the Quran, are not allowed to engage innocent individuals into the conflict, unlike what the Zionist colony of Israel is doing. So I firmly believe that if Israel decides, I firmly believe, let me start that again. I firmly believe that if Iran decides the time has come, they could decimate the Zionist colony of Israel to the point to where you would no longer be able to recognize it in the current state that it exists. But in doing so, Iran would realize the response that they would bring upon themselves to that would be just as catastrophic. So these are, I believe, some of the factors that are being weighed in this multivariant equation. Let's see what else we get here. Multi-Tom, I heard today that the IDF are 20 miles from Damascus. That might be true. I've read that, but in some instances, you got to take some of this with a grain of salt. We can call that the fog of war. In fact, I'm working on Sherry asked me to ask Ray McGovern about why Joe Loria is still on the terrorist watch list as of yesterday. Well, I don't have to ask Ray that question, because the United States anybody that is providing narrative that contradicts the United States narrative is subject to retribution by the United States. And that retribution can manifest itself in a number of ways. I was not on the terrorist list, but I was on the watch list for about 17 years. Still might be, they just haven't come at me lately. The FBI issue was separate from that. And so I would assume, Sherry, that your question about why is Joe Loria still on the terrorist watch list, that would be tied to the fact that Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, the CIA is now trying to remove him from the list, and also remove the $10 million bounty that the CIA placed on his head. And that has to do simply with convenience. simply with convenience. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. That seems to be one of the controlling ideas or ideals that the West, particularly the United States through the CIA and some of its other militaristic entities and decision makers, seems to operate from the idea that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So right now, al-Jilani has served a purpose for the West. Al-Jilani has served a purpose and is serving a purpose for the settler colonial state, the Zionist settler colonial state. So with his serving that purpose, well, now he gets some more space in which to operate. But one of the questions that I think has to be asked, and I'm pretty certain that al-Jilani, understanding history to the degree that he does, knows that Saddam Hussein was an American operative for a very long time. And where is he now? And how did he get there? Muammar Gaddafi tried to work with the United States. Where is he now? How did he get there? So just as quickly as they put you on the list, and they just as quickly as they take you off of the list, they can put you back on the list. Because remember, during the Reagan administration, for as revered as Madiba was, for as revered as Nelson Mandela was, and when he was released from Robben Island, and when he became president of South Africa, he was still on the terrorist list by the United States. So, there doesn't really seem to be any clear-cut, hard-fast logic that enables us to determine how you get on the list, or enables us to determine how you get off of the list. But I would warn Jilani. Okay, thank you. Well, you can see there are a number of different spellings of this gentleman's name, and so the Osama bin Laden. Oh, well, that's a good point. Osama bin Laden as well is another name that needs to be put into that list. The only reason I didn't put Osama bin Laden on that list is because he was never the leader of a country. That's why I didn't put him on that list. But again, this gentleman has a number of names, and Abu Muhammad al-Jilani is one of them. And if I am mistaken in that, then I truly apologize. I mean no disrespect. So let me see, where are we here? Okay. So I'm just trying to go through some more of your questions. You will have to go through the a random Jack. If you ever study marketing strategies, you will have to go through the Art of War. You're absolutely right. Sun Tzu's The Art of War is a phenomenal text. Hot Channels, the Gulf War was not a win. SAS, I'm not sure what that means, but no, I don't see it as a win either. I saw it as a serious ass whooping, and we are continuing to get our hind parts kicked. Sherry says Dick Cheney was evil. No question about that. No question that Dick Cheney was evil, which is one of the reasons why I could never figure out why Vice President Harris thought that embracing Dick Cheney would ingratiate her with anybody. Dude's a war criminal. I never could understand that logic. And Liz Cheney voted with Donald Trump 99% of the time. So I couldn't, well, I say that kind of rhetorically, in that saying I don't know why she did it. I do know why she did it, because that was also a Hillary Clinton strategy when Hillary Clinton ran against Trump in 2016. She believed, and I think it was Bill who said that by embracing Republicans, you'll be able to offset the disenchanted Democrats, that you'll be able to bring more Republicans onto the Democratic side, and that will offset the number of Democrats you're going to lose with these neoconservative policies that she was interested in trying to implement. It didn't win then. It didn't win in 24. And now there's a piece in the New York Times. I don't know if any of you all have read this piece. Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. There's a piece in the New York Times that talks about Harris staffers say they were mistreated on the campaign, and they blame leadership for taking the base for granted. You all need to read this, and particularly those who wanted to try to castigate me for challenging Joy Reid and saying that Kamala Harris ran a flawless campaign. No, this piece, and it's fairly well sourced. This isn't just based on unnamed sources. There are people, even though it says there are a number of folks that didn't want to go on record because they were afraid about their futures and future employment, there are those that go on the that go on the record. Let me just read a couple of things from here really quickly. The New York Times cites staff members who alleged that many campaign offices in Philadelphia were filthy and lacked basic supplies like tables, chairs, cleaning products, and printers. Some campaign offices targeting predominantly Black communities were moved to upscale areas far from the areas they were assigned to serve. This is in this New York Times article. And so anyway, that's a piece that y'all need to look at. That's in the New York Times. And I didn't want to really get off on that tangent, but I think that was a point that was worth making. So what else do we have here? The French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution, not a peasant revolution. Okay. Now this is interesting. Tom, Europe backs America in everything they do. I think it's important to understand that it's you have to, I believe, and Dr. Desai and I discussed this. You have to differentiate between the European elite and the European people, because yes, you're right. The European elite are backing America in everything America does. The European people are getting sick and tired of this. And that is why you're again starting to see an incredibly shift to the right in a number of the parliamentary elections that are taking place in Germany, taking place in France, taking place in a number of other countries. And if they're not shifts to the right, they are removing elected elements and shifting in another direction, because the European people are tired of paying too much for their energy. They're tired of watching their standards of living decrease dramatically. They are tired of all of they're the ones that are in direct sight of a expanded response from Russia. If France continues to back the play in Ukraine, if Germany continues to back the play in Ukraine, they're the ones that will be ground zero to a response from Russia. So the people understand this, and they, I believe, are now very slowly starting to shift their perspective away from from the neo-colonial hegemonic perspective of the United States. How does the US's current global strategy of maintaining influence and power compared to historic examples like the British Empire and the Roman? Oh, well, they're textbook examples. They're the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire. Every empire collapses. And it tends to collapse for a couple of reasons. It overextends itself. Its hubris and its arrogance has those in control or power believe that they're ordained by God to take over the world, and they believe that they are in control of history, and that their ongoing expansion goes unchallenged. And what they wind up coming to realize is those that they have subjugated for as long as they've been able to subjugate them coalesce and create a new dynamic. And so what we're seeing play itself out right before our very eyes with the creation of BRICS, with the creation of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is a number of countries that were sanctioned and are being sanctioned by the United States. They have coalesced, and but they aren't responding militarily as much as they are responding economically. And they are trading off of the dollar. By trading off of the dollar, they are strengthening their own economies. They are, by getting off the dollar, weakening the United States. And that is contributing greatly to the demise, to the fall, to the decline of the American empire. And as a caveat to all of this, and I use that word very loosely, they are also forming military alliances, not out of a sense of aggression, but out of a sense of defense. So they are saying, similar to Article 5 in NATO, that if you are attacked by our common enemy, we will come to your defense. And just a quick note about Article 5. It's very important to realize that the common narrative about Article 5 is, and that's in the NATO treaty, and we are told that Article 5 says if one NATO country is attacked, the other NATO countries will come to the defense of the country under attack, which is true, but there's an out here. They will come to the defense of the country under attack in a manner in which they choose. So that doesn't mean necessarily that they will respond in a military manner. They could send bottles of water in defense. They could send blankets. They could send oatmeal. They will defend the country under attack in a manner that they deem important. Israel is weak at the moment. Oh, I believe that is true. In fact, the last kicks of a dying mule can be the most dangerous. So Israel is incredibly weak. In fact, if it weren't for the backing of the United States, Israel would have been done a long time ago. So it's real. Will Iran respond to Israel? I think the question is, will Iran, or how will Iran respond to the United States through Israel? Similar to what's happening between the United States and Russia as it relates to the Ukraine, is that this is not the fight between Ukraine and Russia. That ended a long time ago. Ukraine got whooped a long time ago. what is enabling the Ukraine to continue this fight is the United States backing and mandating this. So with that, let's see what else we got. Well, this is an interesting point. They about the election, they wanted Harris to lose. Well, I don't know who they are. Obviously, the people that voted for Donald Trump wanted Harris to lose. But when you say they wanted her to lose, I'm not sure who you mean by that. I have issues, and much to my son's dismay, I got issues when people speak in terms of pronouns. I like to know exactly when you say they wanted, who are they? What I believe, and so I'll respond to your point about they wanted Harris to lose, not knowing who they are, by saying this. Because Joe Biden took so long to get out of the election, because Joe Biden waited until July and leaving only 100 and some odd day window for anybody to mount a campaign, there were a lot of people that decided that the chances of victory were slim, and they weren't going to risk their political capital on a losing effort. That's why there were a number of folks that could have gotten into the race, but didn't get into the race because they saw it as such an uphill climb and the probability of loss was so high that they weren't going to waste their opportunity on this. And so I'll say that, but again, not knowing who they are, because remember, homegirl raised a hell of a lot of money. So for those who wanted her to lose, there were a lot of big time donors that put a hell of a lot of big time money behind that failed effort. So that would be a point for discussion at another time. I don't know. Do you think he was? I don't know what that means. So with that, folks, let's end this here. And where are we time wise? Oh yeah, let's end this here. I thank you all so much for working with us on this. Again, yesterday we started early. Today we started early. We'll be back to our regular time tomorrow. There were just some events that occurred that resulted in our having to start early as opposed to not doing a show at all. So thank you all so much for staying with us, even through the technical issues, which my brilliant producer was able to work through. I got to thank Dr. Radhika Desai for joining me today. Thank you all for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for a new episode tomorrow. Got some great folks coming up for the remainder of the week. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. You'll find all the links to the show below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. That talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you all again tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a great day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.